The night begins with silence, the kind that feels older than sound itself, stretching across a landscape where stone remembers more than living voices ever could. Under an unbroken sky, starlight touches the edges of forgotten monoliths, half sunk in soil like memories buried but not erased. Wind moves gently across their surfaces, brushing dust from carvings nobody alive has heard explained. Nothing speaks, yet everything whispers. The earth feels aware, as if watching us step closer to secrets it once tried to forget. Shadows curl around pillars, arranged with precision, impossible for a people we call primitive. In this stillness, time stretches, centuries breathe. We stand at the edge of a world older than history, and something subtle inside us recognizes it. Göbekli Tepe rises first from the dark circles of stone carved with animals long vanished, placed with intention we can sense but cannot translate. Not far in thought, though oceans apart in space, lie stones in Peru cut so perfectly that air cannot pass between them. Their weight is a challenge to modern engineering, yet they were shaped by hands we barely understand. In Lebanon, blocks the size of houses rest in perfect alignment, unmoved by quakes or kings. And across desert horizons, scattered alignments trace constellations forgotten by those who now walk the sand. The world is full of ruins that should not exist, but they do, stubborn, silent, enduring. We wander through moonlit fragments of a story stripped of pages. Each stone is a chapter without words, each surface a sentence weathered by rain and time. If we listen long enough, imagination supplies what history does not. Perhaps once there were architects who watched the sky instead of clocks, who carved memory into rock because paper had not yet been dreamed. Perhaps they understood the movement of stars so deeply that monuments became maps and worship was geometry. We are told civilization began with cities, yet these stones argue otherwise. They suggest knowledge older than law, older than agriculture, older than fear. They wait beneath soil, as if expecting someone to remember. Tonight, we try. The darkness around them feels alive, not threatening, but patient. A riddle waiting through millennia for a mind willing to wonder. As we drift deeper into this stillness, questions surface as naturally as breath. Why these stones? Why such scale? Why such care from people we assume knew so little? The answers do not arrive, and maybe they are not meant to. Mystery is a doorway, not a wall. We cross its threshold slowly, letting curiosity guide rather than certainty. In this quiet, we sense that the beginning of our story is not where we think it is. Perhaps the first chapter lies here, under moon, under dust, under silence. And as we step forward, one thought follows like a shadow we cannot escape. Everything we believe about our past may have started far too late. Their legacy rests not in books but in stone, and stone endures where memory fades. If we close our eyes, we feel them near, shaping rock beneath hands hardened by wind and time, guided by knowledge we no longer hold. Perhaps they built not to last, but to be rediscovered when we were ready to ask the right questions. Now, as we stand before these silent giants, one truth takes shape: not everything hidden is lost. Some wait, some return in whispers when the world falls quiet. Tonight we stand at the threshold, and with a single breath, the journey begins. There are moments in history where silence feels heavier than evidence, where absence weighs more than presence. As we move deeper into this quiet landscape of stone, a thought begins to form, cautious at first, then persistent. What if civilization did not rise in the Fertile Crescent, but merely resurfaced there? Not a beginning, but a return. The ruins we see scattered across continents behave like fragments from a story written long before names, before kings, before grain was tamed into fields. Their age whispers from weathered edges, erosion marking years in patterns even geologists hesitate to define. These stones seem older than the civilizations credited with genius. They stand as if watching younger empires grow, flourish, collapse, and be forgotten, while they themselves endured. We are taught that the first cities formed in Mesopotamia, that pyramids were feats of human advancement, that progress began when writing was born. Yet in remote valleys and windswept plains we find masonry so advanced it mocks bronze and iron. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons, shaped as if brittle stone once moved like warm wax. Walls interlock like puzzles made by minds unconstrained by limitation. The accepted timeline bends beneath this weight, and anyone listening closely feels its strain. Weathering marks carved stones with signatures older than expected, Rain traces grooves deeper than what a few thousand years should allow. Precipitation scars suggest entire epochs may have passed since tools struck rock. Some ruins show signs of seismic upheaval, not merely time, but catastrophe. As if earthquakes swallowed cities whole, leaving only the bones of architecture behind. Riverbeds shifted, mountains rose. Shorelines drowned beneath oceans newly born from melting ice. What remains today may be survivors of continents reshaped beyond recognition. Ancient myths speak, too, in ways science often overlooks. Tales of ancestors who came before the first tribes. Stories of sky watchers and stone raisers, of builders who vanished like morning stars. Oracles tell of great fires, of floods swallowing lands where sunlight once warmed gardens and homes. Legends scattered across cultures, distant, separate, yet strangely synchronized, describe a world ending long before history begins. If different peoples remember the same destruction, separated by oceans and centuries, what does that mean? Perhaps there was a civilization before civilization. Not primitive, not lost in struggle for survival, but intentional, skilled with stone, fluent in stars. Their tools may have been simple to our eyes, yet guided by understanding we cannot recover. Knowledge is not always bound to metal or machinery. Sometimes it lies in pattern, patience, memory. Imagine a world lit by fire and moonlight, where minds watched seasons like scriptures, and the earth itself was a library of time. Such a people may have lived not in shadow but in balance, their achievements scattered like seeds carried on wind. We do not claim certainty. We walk softly, like guests in a house whose owners left long ago. Clues appear like breadcrumbs, too many to ignore, too few to declare truth. Every step forward widens the possibility that history is younger than humanity. That behind the curtain of recorded time stands a much older stage, and somewhere beneath dirt and centuries lies a chapter we were never taught to read. If someone built before Egypt, before Sumer, before the first clay tablet was pressed, why do we not know their name? Why did they vanish without crown or chronicle? What force erases entire civilizations yet leaves their monuments shining through time like stars through fog? These questions draw us onward, slow and curious, toward a place where answers may begin to surface. A hill in Turkey where stone circles rise like a heartbeat beneath the earth. A temple, older than agriculture, older than story. The trail leads there now, toward Göbekli Tepe, and the first true revelation awaits. At the crest of a modest hill in southeastern Turkey, where the wind carries the scent of dry grass and quiet horizons, something ancient begins to surface. Not through myth or rumor, but through stone deliberate, carved, assembled with precision that unsettles modern certainty. Göbekli Tepe rises from the soil like a memory long buried, its pillars arranged in circles that resemble thought made physical. Each stone stands taller than a person, some towering twice that, shaped into T-like forms as if echoing an image we no longer understand. They feel less like architecture and more like intention solidified. When moonlight touches their surfaces, carved animals seem alive, foxes running in frozen chase, bird wings outstretched, serpents curling across limestone like whispers. These are not crude marks of early hands. They are confident strokes, clean and practiced, made by minds that did not stumble through invention, but executed decisions with knowing ease. At first glance, one might call this a shrine, yet its age refuses simplicity. 12,000 years old, older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than the wheel. Before wheat was cultivated and sheep were tamed, someone built this place. Before villages clustered around rivers, before kings and scribes etched their rule in clay, a civilization gathered here with purpose. The pillars suggest knowledge of alignment. The arcs suggest symmetry born of calculation. And beneath those stones lies a question heavier than any monolith ever placed. Who needed worship before cities, before harvests, before civilization as we define it? For decades, history textbooks taught that religion followed settlement, that ritual grew from surplus, that temples appeared only after societies were stable enough to build them. Göbekli Tepe quietly disagrees. It suggests belief may have preceded society. That ritual called people together, and civilization followed its voice. Instead of a world where survival birthed meaning, this site hints at a world where meaning birthed society. The contrast is subtle but profound, like turning a coin over and realizing both sides tell a different story. Excavations revealed something stranger still. Göbekli Tepe was buried, not by wind or time alone, but purposefully layer upon layer of soil and stone packed around the pillars as if sealing them from the future. A temple entombed not after abandonment but through careful effort, as though the builders, or those who inherited their work, decided it must be hidden, to protect it, to close a chapter, to ensure only those who came much later would find it, when their minds were ready for what it meant. This deliberate burial transforms the site from curiosity to enigma. A people advanced enough to raise these pillars, advanced enough to align them with sky and season, were also advanced enough to conceal them completely. Scholars debate whether this was ritual closure, a symbolic ending of an era. Others wonder if it was defense not against enemies, but against oblivion. When the world around them changed, when climate shifted and game grew scarce, did they fear knowledge would vanish? Did they bury their legacy like seeds beneath earth, trusting future hands to uncover it when the time was right? The mind drifts through possibilities like lanterns across a dark lake. None settle as answer, all glow as invitation. Humanity rarely archives what it does not value. Yet here we find meaning preserved, not in script, not in story, but in stone circles, older than recorded thought. If this was memory, it was memory cast in monuments strong enough to withstand 12 millennia of wind and silence. If this was prayer, it was prayer carved into the bones of the earth. Whoever built this place did so with conviction so deep it carried beyond collapse, beyond ice, beyond forgetfulness itself. Archaeologists speak of Göbekli Tepe as a turning point, a crack in the timeline through which older light escapes. It challenges the belief that complexity came late, that knowledge was slow and incremental. Its existence suggests brilliance once known, then lost, a peak before the world reset itself. When one stands among those stones, or even imagines standing there beneath stars, the illusion of linear history falters. It feels instead like waves, rise, fall, return, as though intelligence is not newborn but cyclical, rediscovered after long winters of forgetting. The animals carved into the pillars gaze outward like guardians of secrets we have only begun to hear. Their silence is not empty, it is patient. Each relief seems to gesture beyond its own form, pointing toward a story we are still learning to read. There is symmetry without explanation, symbolism without translation. We wander these rings like guests entering a house whose language has died but whose presence remains. Wonder deepens not through clarity but through uncertainty. The unknown becomes comforting, like a darkness that invites rather than frightens. Göbekli Tepe is not a conclusion. It is a beginning disguised as aftermath, a question shaped in stone, waiting 12,000 years for us to ask it. And now, standing before these circles beneath the dust, one realizes this site is not the whole story, only the first whisper. If such complexity existed here, at the dawn of time, then what else lies beneath deserts, beneath jungles, beneath waves? What other monuments sleep beneath the earth, waiting to rise like this one did? The path widens beyond this hill. The stones point outward, to other lands, other enigmas. This is no solitary miracle, only the first we have uncovered. More awaits, scattered like constellations across the world. From this beginning we follow the trail, for Göbekli Tepe is not the answer, it is the invitation. High in the thin air of the Peruvian Andes, sunlight falls across a fortress of stone that refuses to behave like history says it should. Sacsayhuamán stands above Cusco like a challenge to the timeline, a place where rock bends to imagination rather than fracture under pressure. Here, walls rise not from bricks but from giants, stones as tall as men, others as large as rooms, each cut into impossible shapes that lock together like pieces of a puzzle forged in a dream. There is no mortar to hold them, none is needed. The fit is so precise that a blade cannot slip between the seams, not even a strand of hair. These stones lean into one another with deliberate angles, absorbing earthquakes as if built to breathe with the earth instead of resisting it. They do not crack when mountains tremble. They shift and return, living architecture. We are told that Inca hands shaped this place, carving basalt and andesite, using tools softer than the stone itself. Copper, stone, force nothing more. Yet here we stand, confronted with interlocking blocks weighing tens of tons, some hundreds, moved uphill without wheels, cranes, or iron. They do not merely align, they articulate. Each polygon is unique, as though stone, once liquid, cooled into intention. Facets meet like facets of a diamond, precise beyond practicality. No template repeats. No pattern reveals easy logic. These walls feel less constructed and more grown, like mineral forests pruned into design only their makers understood. Engineers study these joints and shake their heads. They find no symmetry they can replicate without machinery. Modern stoneworkers admire edges that have not eroded after centuries of rain and sun. Seismic architects marvel at the fluid geometry, wondering how ancient builders understood movement of land as if reading its pulse. But the mystery is not only in how the walls were cut, it lies also in how they were set. Each stone anchors the next, weight distributed like language in verse. Remove one, and the poem collapses. Yet in this structure, no stone dominates. Every piece matters equally, like knowledge passed across generations so carefully that none dared weaken the chain. The mind rebels gently here. How could so-called primitive people manipulate such mass with such grace? How did they shape stone as if kneeling beside soft clay? What technology did they possess that we do not? Could it be that they inherited skills from an older culture, one whose memory fades like twilight across ages? The walls suggest mastery, not experimentation. They speak of understanding perfected, not discovered. And as we walk their length, the disbelief grows, not frantic, but slow and deep, like the realization that something once known has been forgotten. Night watchers feel this sensation most keenly. The late-hour thinker senses contradiction not as threat, but as invitation. Sacsayhuamán stands like proof object, a monument that does not ask to be believed, only seen. It exists. Therefore something once existed that could create it. The stones do not argue. They are the argument. They press against each other with confidence, the way knowledge presses against silence. Their surfaces bear the marks of intention chisel scars, faintly visible where ancient hands guided force with accuracy modern tools would envy. Walk closer, and you feel weight beyond stone, the weight of a timeline that strains. If such construction was possible here centuries ago, why does similar complexity not appear everywhere? Why does knowledge seem to bloom fully formed, then vanish without leaving tools behind? Did a technique die with its last practitioners, their understanding dissolved into myth? Or was it suppressed, forgotten in transitions of power? We cannot know. We can only stand before these walls and recognize that history, neat as it looks in books, ripples beneath the surface. The sun lowers. Shadows slip into gaps so narrow they disappear. A breeze crosses the hillside like an exhale from an age we cannot access. Sacsayhuamán remains silent, unbothered by confusion. It does not rush to explain itself. It does not apologize for existing. It rests like the answer to a question we have not yet learned how to ask. Peru leaves us with wonder, sharp enough to cut old assumptions. Yet, if these stones unsettle, if they stretch imagination toward a forgotten world, then what waits beyond them may fracture certainty entirely. Because across the ocean, in a different landscape carved by different hands, there are stones even larger, heavier, more defiant than these. Peru is one puzzle. An even greater one waits in Lebanon. In the heart of Lebanon, where mountains watch over plains and centuries fold into one another like pages of a forgotten book, an ancient platform rests beneath the ruins of Baalbek. Sunlight reveals its scale with unsettling clarity. Here lie stones unlike any others on earth, not the fitted polygons of Peru, nor the refined circles of Göbekli Tepe, but monoliths so massive they challenge comprehension. 3 of them stand side by side, known as the trilithon, each weighing between 800 and 1,200 tons. They are not theories, they are not rumors, they are stone, solid, and indisputable, sitting perfectly level in foundations older than the empire built above them. When one stands at their base, human proportion feels like an afterthought. The mind reaches for comparisons, a blue whale, a diesel locomotive, and still the scale remains surreal. Modern cranes struggle to lift a fraction of that weight. The most advanced machines we possess today would have to operate at their limit to move even one of these blocks, and even then, the logistics of maneuvering them into place with precision remain daunting. Yet someone, long before steel and engines, did just that. They quarried these stones from hills nearly a kilometer away. They transported them without roads. They raised them into alignment that has not shifted in thousands of years. No mortar binds them. Gravity and mastery alone hold them. The workmanship is silent, but its confidence is unmistakable. Some say the Romans built Baalbek, and in many ways they did. Columns rise above the platform, grand and fluted, temple structures sprawled with imperial ornament. But beneath Roman glory sits something far stranger, a foundation that does not match the architecture above. It is as if an elder skeleton supports a younger body, and history has learned to speak only of the flesh. The Romans, brilliant engineers in their own right, placed smaller stones around the trilithon, never over it. Their work complements, but does not replace. They built atop greatness, not into it. And when asked how they moved the trilithon, ancient writers gave no answer. They never claimed credit. They never described the process. They never even hinted at owning the ability. So the question lingers like smoke in quiet evening air. If the Romans did not lift these stones, who did? And when? Scholars propose theories ramps of unimaginable length, armies dragging stone inch by inch, lubricated roads of logs or clay. These possibilities do not soothe the mind. They require their own leaps of faith. Why would a civilization spend such resources on foundation stones invisible beneath later construction? Why would they choose blocks too large for redundancy, too precise for error? It feels less like practicality and more like statement, a message carved into mass, a declaration from an era that did not fear ambition. Some believe the trilithon predates the Romans by millennia, remnants of a lost phase of building now swallowed by time. Evidence is suggestive but not confirmed erosion, where Roman stone remains sharp, tool marks inconsistent with classical techniques. No written records explain them. No cultural memory claims them. They simply exist, as if risen from bedrock by hands unnamed. The absence of explanation is what makes them feel alive. Inconsistency becomes invitation. Viewers sense what history books rarely say aloud. Sometimes the most obvious truth is one we have forgotten to consider. Imagine a civilization that knew how to harness mass with ease, one not intimidated by scale, a people who shaped stone not as obstacle, but as medium. Perhaps they built with size because they could, or because permanence was their goal, or because their world demanded strength modern minds no longer require. Whatever the reason, their legacy sits beneath Baalbek like a heartbeat beneath layered centuries. To look upon these blocks is to feel time contract, the ancient becoming immediate, the impossible becoming present. Night deepens in Lebanon, and shadows lengthen across the trilithon as though the stones draw dusk toward them. They do not offer answers. They do not diminish under scrutiny. The longer one gazes, the more the mystery expands. We are left holding a question too large to ignore. If those who built the greatest stones left no name, what else did they leave that we have yet to notice? We carry this thought with us as we turn from weight to wonder. Stones can defy machinery, but some monuments reach beyond engineering into something more elusive. For while the trilithon challenges our strength, another layer of mystery challenges our understanding of the sky itself. Alignments carved not for earth, but for heavens. Across the world, beyond architecture and weight, another pattern emerges, quieter, more deliberate, almost celestial in its intent. Some ancient stones do not merely stand, they point, they align. They watch the sky as though remembering something humanity has forgotten. In the rolling plains of England, Stonehenge greets the solstice like a clock set before time itself. On the longest day of the year, sunlight pierces a single path through stones older than writing, striking the altar as if honouring a contract with the heavens. Not by accident, not by chance. This alignment required observation across generations, the patient tracking of sunrise and season until certainty became stone. Yet Stonehenge is not alone. Far south in the Sahara, beneath shifting dunes and desert heat, lies Nabta Playa, a site even older. Here, stones circle like a cosmic diagram, marking not only solstice but star positions difficult to track without instruments. Their alignment matches Orion's belt during a period when the Sahara was a green savanna, long before recorded civilization. This is not the work of people guessing sky patterns. It is the work of sky readers, astronomer engineers who studied the heavens with a discipline modern stargazers would respect. The question arrives gently, like a shadow crossing moonlit sand. Why were prehistoric builders mapping stars they shouldn't have been able to see? No lenses, no telescopes, no metal tools. And yet, alignments at Nabta Playa reflect astronomical knowledge, spanning centuries of observation. Someone watched, recorded, remembered long enough to carve eternity into Earth. Their monuments do not speak of superstition but of measurement, calculation, design. These places whisper the same secret in different tongues. Pyramids in Egypt echo Orion's belt. Temples in Cambodia mirror Draco at its ancient position. Lines cut across the Nazca Desert, stretch toward constellations like signals to a distant memory. Ruins speak in angles, not words, their language geometry, their script, shadow and sun. The deeper we look, the less these structures resemble the work of simple pastoral tribes. Instead, we see intelligence unhurried by modern urgency, a civilization not racing toward innovation, but orbiting knowledge like planets around a star. They built for cycles longer than any life, marking precession and lunar nodes patterns that take thousands of years to complete. Who passes knowledge across so much time? Who teaches children to measure the sky across generations? It implies not random brilliance, but continuity, a tradition of observation older than history. Standing among these stones, one feels watched not by gods, but by time. They challenge us without raising a voice. To gaze upward from Stonehenge at sunrise, or across the desert at Nabta Playa under a moonless night, is to sense the presence of minds who understood the universe not theoretically, but intimately. Their monuments are questions we have not fully learned to ask. If we accept that ancient builders tracked celestial cycles with astonishing accuracy, then the narrative of human development becomes less linear, more tidal. Knowledge may not have grown slowly, it may have surged, been lost, and surged again. Civilizations rise like constellations at dusk, burn bright, then fade behind clouds of time, only to reappear when night clears once more. These stones do not simply mark the past. They map the stars as they once were, anchoring heaven to earth like memory pinned to bone. They allow us to reconstruct the sky of a world drowned by time, a world inhabited by people who read constellations the way we read clocks. If the builders were primitive, their stones do not agree. And so, we leave the sky, not satisfied, but stirred. Alignments hold no answers, only invitations, like doorways left ajar in the oldest rooms of human story. Some secrets were not written but remembered, and some memories survived through myth, waiting quietly for us to return to them. Stories are older than writing, older than stone, older even than memory itself. Before tablets and ink, before chronicle and archive, humans spoke history in the language of myth, not with dates and measurements, but with symbols and echoes. Myths survive where cities fall. They travel through generations like seeds carried in rhythm, in shared breath, in fireside retellings when the night grows long. For centuries, we called them fantasy. But what if they are something else? What if myths are history told in a language we forgot to read? Across the world, cultures separated by oceans recall a flood that drowned an earlier age. From the Sumerians came the tale of Utnapishtim, preserved in cuneiform, long after words first found form. The Hebrew story of Noah sails the same waters. Greek memory speaks of Deucalion and the cleansing of mankind. In India, Manu survived a rising ocean, guided by a sacred fish. In the Americas, Hopi elders tell of worlds destroyed by water and rebuilt upon new earth. And from Aboriginal Australia comes the Dreamtime flood, deep and ancient. These stories are not identical, yet they rhyme. They point to something real beneath metaphor, something that shook many peoples, not just one. Myths also speak of sky beings, teachers descending not with conquest, but with knowledge. Viracocha appears in the Andes, a pale figure teaching agriculture and civilization before walking west across the sea. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrives with gifts of astronomy and calendar. In Egypt, Thoth is keeper of wisdom, writing, measurement. Dogon elders in Mali describe beings from the star Sirius, a story predating telescope confirmation of Sirius B by millennia. Such accounts could be imagination, or they could be memory reshaped by time, a recollection of teachers lost to history. When cultures so distant share themes so similar, coincidence feels like the least interesting explanation. Then there are legends of stone cities swallowed by the sea. Plato speaks of Atlantis, a great island that fell beneath waves in a single night. Japanese divers near Yonaguni explore submerged terraces shaped like stairways to forgotten temples. Off the coast of India, beneath the waters of Gujarat, structures lie preserved in silt walls, platforms, grid patterns washed by tides. The ocean holds secrets we have barely begun to see, and myth may be the lantern left for us to follow. If we treat myth not as fancy, but as encoded memory, everything shifts. Flood stories become chronicles of climate collapse at the end of the Ice Age. Sky beings become bearers of knowledge, survivors of an older world, teaching a new one how to rebuild. Sunken kingdoms become cities lost to rising seas when glaciers melted and shorelines transformed. Inversion occurs, fantasy becomes archive, legend becomes data. The past gains depth where before it seemed shallow. This is not a call for certainty. It is an invitation to read differently. A myth may hold truth the way poetry holds feeling, not literal, but resonant. Perhaps the ancients preserved history the only way they could, weaving memory into story so it could survive beyond parchment and stone. A child remembers a tale long after forgetting the facts that inspired it. Cultures remember myths long after forgetting the world that birthed them. In this light, legend becomes a vessel, carrying fragments of knowledge through storms of time. We sit within this possibility quietly, like listeners leaning close to hear elders speak. The tone is calm, the pace slow, because myth is not hurried. It moves like river water, patient, persistent, shaping the landscape of belief. The more we listen, the more familiar it feels. As if we have known these stories all along, but only now begin to understand what they may be telling us. If floods appear everywhere in myth, perhaps there was once a flood. If sky beings appear everywhere in myth, perhaps there were once sky watchers or teachers whose deeds were remembered as divine. If sunken cities appear everywhere in myth, perhaps coastlines once hid civilizations we have not yet rediscovered. The thought grows like dawn, soft yet unstoppable. Legends whisper where history stays silent. They remember things archaeology has not yet confirmed. They murmur of catastrophe, not as metaphor, but as event. Floods that swept away knowledge, fire that ended eras, worlds lost and rebuilt. And so, with myths recast as memory, our path leads toward the possibility of disaster. If an ancient civilization existed before the first known kingdoms, perhaps it was washed away. Flood stories are not conclusions, they are warnings. And warnings point toward the storm that once was a catastrophe we now must face. Before the oceans rose and the horizon swallowed coastlines forever, Earth was different. Not in ways we struggle to imagine, but in ways faintly familiar, lush river valleys unfurling like ribbons across continents, forests climbing mountains that now stand barren, great plains humming with herds that left no bones behind. The world before the Younger Dryas was warmer, wetter, alive with possibility. Ice sheets still clung to the poles, but their grip was loosening. Seasons shifted with slow intention. Rivers braided across open land, feeding civilizations that may never be written into history. Humanity walked through a world green and generous, where coastlines stretched much farther than the modern map suggests. Villages might have dotted shores now drowned beneath thousands of feet of ocean. Knowledge passed not in ink, but in hands, in stone placements, in the angle of sunrise on midwinter morning. We imagine them people who built before the known beginning. They watched the sky with patience, lived close to the sea that fed them, carved monuments that tracked time like heartbeat. Perhaps they flourished for centuries, long enough to refine skill into tradition, long enough to forget they were mortal against climate, long enough to believe the world was permanent. Then the ice began to melt faster. The air warmed. Waters gathered not as gentle flood, but as rising tide that would not recede. Glacial walls cracked with thunder that rolled like war across the land. Rivers swelled, lakes merged into seas, and shorelines crept inward with quiet hunger. One can almost see it. Villages waking to find the beach closer than yesterday. Fields salted by encroaching tide. Safe harbors swallowed by waves. Families must have carried what they could, walking inland as memory washed away behind them. Stone temples, meeting places, astronomical markers all left to ocean and silt. The world shifted too quickly for architecture to survive. Even monuments that stood for centuries were no match for oceans rising hundreds of feet. A coastline is a fragile promise. A civilization built at its edge is a dream easily erased. As water climbed, knowledge dissolved faster than stone. Techniques once perfected in stonecraft and alignment might have vanished with those who wielded them. Who passes down a skill when survival demands everything else? Stories stretch further than tools. Maybe that is why myth remains while architecture does not. A flood becomes legend because legend can float. Walls cannot. The Younger Dryas was not merely climatic change, it was forgetting. A reset. Humanity reduced to endurance, forced to rebuild from fragments instead of inheritance. Imagine a city now drowned beneath Atlantic waters, pillars covered in coral instead of lichen. Imagine stone pathways traced by waves instead of footsteps. Imagine a library of carved knowledge buried under silt, its meaning unreachable except through speculation and dream. If they existed, the ocean keeps them secret. The sea is both archive and eraser. It preserves what it buries, yet hides it from sight. The melancholy whispers through this chapter, not to sadden, but to deepen. Loss shapes history as much as survival. A civilization erased is still a civilization. Its ghosts live in flood stories, in legends repeated across continents, in megaliths that stand as if searching for their makers. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe and the stones of Sacsayhuamán learned from ancestors who lived before the waters rose, then we are witnessing the surface of a deeper past. Beneath every known beginning lies an older shadow. We stand at the edge of that memory now, looking back into a time we cannot fully reach. Did rising oceans swallow the world of the first stone builders? Or did those builders watch the flood come, carve warnings into rock, and scatter to lands where they became gods in myth and strangers in history? The question lingers like mist above morning tide. It asks us not to answer, but to wonder. The ocean holds stories older than civilization, older than writing, older than recorded dream. Beneath its surface may sleep entire worlds waiting for rediscovery. And where there is loss, there must also be those who survived carrying with them fragments of knowledge, seeds of memory, whispers of a time before the water came. Loss invites survivors. When the waters finally receded, when new coastlines settled into place, and forgotten cities slept beneath the waves, the world did not return to silence. Survivors walked away from the ruins of their old lives carrying more than memory. They carried knowledge. Not whole, not unbroken, but fractured like pottery shards scattered across a floor. They could no longer rebuild the world they had lost, but they could preserve pieces of it, a way of shaping stone, a geometry for aligning structures with stars, a story of the sky that once guided migrations. These remnants moved outward, traveling across continents that were newborn in shape but ancient in spirit. They became wanderers, teaching fragments of a fallen civilization to people who had never seen megaliths rise or constellations obey structure. Perhaps they reached the Nile Valley first, settling along the river where floods were predictable and life returned in rhythm. There, fragments of forgotten engineering might have shaped the earliest stonework, inspiring architecture that later blossomed into pyramids. Later travelers could have crossed seas or followed coastlines, arriving in South America, where their presence shimmered into legend-pale strangers with knowledge of stars and stone. In Peru, they may have taught a technique rather than building with their own hands. In Anatolia, they may have recalled the shape of a circle long before the world knew cities. And in each place, they were remembered not as refugees of a ruined age, but as gods, bringers of knowledge, teachers from the sky. Civilizations encountering them would have seen miracles where survivors saw memory. To a people beginning anew, the remnants of earlier wisdom would seem like magic. A person who could cut stone with precision, who could track solstice without instrument, who could draw the movement of stars, such a one would not be mortal, not in the eyes of those rebuilding from scratch. It is no wonder they became myth. It is no wonder the stories magnified them into deities, thunder-bearers, feathered serpents, white-haired creators, not because they descended from heaven, but because they came from a world washed away. In this way, history did not start over. It restarted with fragments. A spark here, a technique there, enough to ignite civilizations, but not enough to restore the one that was lost. The knowledge of geopolymer mixtures, of sonic shaping, of astronomical cycles lasting thousands of years, many of these tools may have faded as generations passed, and urgency replaced curiosity. But stone remembers where people forget. Architecture became the vessel for memory, and monuments became messages carved into the earth itself. Survivors might have known their time was limited, their wisdom fragile, so they built, not for themselves, but for whoever came after. They carved not prayer, but instruction. We imagine them travelers with eyes trained to the horizon, nomads carrying secrets instead of possessions, a mother telling her child how stars shift over centuries, a craftsman teaching how to place one stone so it breathes with earthquake, a priest preserving a myth of flood, not as metaphor, but as warning. These remnants of a vanished world might have seeded the knowledge that later cultures grew into their own legacies. Egypt, Peru, Turkey, far apart, yet connected by echoes of an earlier voice. If fragments survived, where did they leave their last message? In which stone? Under which layer of sand? in which alignment of pillars does the final instruction wait. We look upon ancient structures now not as ruins, but as pages. Each monument a line, each alignment a sentence. Together they form a text older than writing a script, written in shadow and sunrise. Which brings us to the deeper realization. The stones themselves are messages. A stone can speak when we learn how to listen. For decades, archaeologists catalogued carvings as artwork decoration for ritual, symbols of belief, images meant only to impress or intimidate. But the longer we look, the more those carvings behave like language. Not random, not ornamental, structured, repeating, patterned across continents. At Göbekli Tepe, foxes and cranes appear in sequences, as if telling a story in animals the way we use letters. A vulture stands beside a circle that resembles the sun. A scorpion follows a constellation pattern now linked to Sagittarius. These may be sentences in a script older than sound, older than clay tablets, older than alphabets still unborn. If so, the stones are not monuments, they are archives. Imagine carving an event into rock instead of writing it in ink. Fire in the sky. A star that rose where it never rose before. A winter that came early and left late. In a world without paper, memory had to become permanent. Rock became recording. Animal symbols became syntax. A fox may not represent a fox at all, but a season, a star, a tribe, a catastrophe. We have mistaken pictures for stories when they might be instructions. This thought changes everything. Suddenly, every carving becomes a message waiting through centuries for someone with the right question to unlock it. Across the ocean, in Peru, we find serpents and pumas carved into stone at Chichén Itzá. In Easter Island, birdman figures repeat with ritual precision. In the Indus Valley, symbols recur like punctuation, fish, jar, leaf, circle. No culture invented alphabet in isolation, yet symbols appear worldwide long before writing as we know it. Threads connect them like veins beneath history's skin. These motifs, geometric, animal, celestial, may reflect events shared across continents when oceans were different, when land carried people farther than we now assume. The carvings whisper of migrations, of knowledge carried like ember from one coast to another. We consider geometric shapes as well. Spirals carved into tombs in Ireland, spirals painted in caves of the American Southwest, circles within circles, triangles pointing skyward, grids that resemble star charts. Science calls them motifs. But rhythm in repetition suggests purpose. A spiral may mark a cycle, precession, season, flood. A circle divided may be a calendar. A triangle could align to solstice sunrise. We look at these symbols with modern eyes and see design. But ancient minds may have seen data. Stone holds memory longer than flesh. A story told by voice survives only as long as its teller. A carving survives millennia. If the builders knew their world could fall again, if they remembered a flood that erased cities, they might leave warnings for the next cycle. A scorpion carved beside a star cluster could mark the night catastrophe began. A vulture beside a sphere could signal the death of sunlight in volcanic ash. What we call art could be history. History written in pictures because writing had not yet become script. This idea grows slowly, like dawn over desert rock. The viewer begins to see carvings differently. Not murals, messages, not worship, memory. If each animal is a symbol, each pattern a sentence, then ancient sites become libraries without walls. Göbekli Tepe is a chapter. Sacsayhuamán is a page. Baalbek, Nabta, Playa, Chavin, Stonehenge volumes in a collection left across the world like breadcrumbs for future minds. Constellation alignments become indexes. Pillars become bookmarks. We are surrounded not by ruins but by records. The stones may be telling us where they came from, or what they survived, or what to expect when the stars return to positions they held long ago. This is no fantasy, it is possibility, grounded in repetition, too consistent for coincidence. We have dismissed messages because we lost the key to read them. Like children finding books in unknown language, we admire shapes without grasping meaning. Yet meaning may still be there, waiting for us to recognize pattern as grammar. If carvings are sentences, who wrote them? If the stones are libraries, who were the librarians? The thought settles like dust on basalt, quiet, persistent. We have studied the artifacts without asking who raised them, who carved them, who taught the next generation when rivers changed course. Language implies authors. Archive implies archivist. And as our attention shifts from symbols to the hands that shape them, we turn naturally toward the builders themselves, the minds behind the message. To understand the stones, we must imagine the hands that placed them. Not faceless laborers, not nameless shadows beneath legend, but people living, breathing, thinking, walking through a world we no longer recognize. They rose with sunrise, ate what rivers and forests provided, and slept beneath skies unpolluted by memory or machine. Their diet was simple but sustaining. Wild grains gathered long before agriculture, berries bright with morning dew, meat hunted with precision rather than haste. They knew which plants healed and which harmed. They shaped tools from obsidian, sharper than surgical steel, crafted ropes from animal sinew that could bind stone like tendon to bone. Their world was older than writing, but not crude. It was deliberate. They moved like migratory birds, follow seasons, not wandering aimlessly, but guided by knowledge of land and pattern. Camps became settlements. Settlements became gatherings. Gatherings became places where stone circled sky like prayer. These people watched stars the way modern minds read screens, not passively, but with comprehension. Each night was scripture. Each constellation, memory. Their rituals may have been quiet, circles of fire, chanting like wind moving through reeds, offerings left beneath carved pillars. A fox etched in limestone might mark the return of a season. A crane might call forth migration. They spoke in symbols because symbols endured. We picture them shaping pillars with patience. Modern construction rarely mirrors. Not the rush of deadline, but the rhythm of purpose. A stone was not merely cut, it was courted. Hours stretched into days, days into seasons, until a surface responded to touch like water responding to moon. They built not to conquer landscape, but to converse with it. Walls were not fortresses, but instruments tuned to Earth's pulse. When they placed one monolith atop another, it was not force, but trust. Knowledge passed like flame from hand to hand across generations. And yet, we do not know their names. History remembers empires born from war, not civilizations born from understanding. No kings claim these works, no chronicles celebrate their ages. The people who carved fox, crane, scorpion, serpent left no inscriptions of themselves, only their knowledge. It is as though they wished to be remembered through what they built, not who they were. Unity over ego, craft over conquest, a society defined not by rulers, but by purpose. Their tools were basic in form, extraordinary in execution. Hammerstones smoothed by years of use. Simple levers of wood wielded with complex insight into balance and gravity. Fire-hardened tips of drill stones. Yet results defy assumption. It is easier to imagine lost technology than underestimated intelligence, but perhaps intelligence itself was the technology. Skill refined by repetition, guided by community rather than individual flair. Knowledge carried mouth to ear, gesture to apprentice, memory to stone. Rituals shaped their days. They may have fasted before lifting monoliths, purified themselves in cold streams, painted skin with mineral pigments like the earth wearing its own language. At night they likely gathered in circles, children asking the same questions children ask today. Where did we come from? Where do we go? Their elders pointed upward, tracing constellations with fingers, teaching time without clocks. Stars became calendar, seasons became map. Even migration was mathematics disguised as instinct. We see evidence in bones found near ancient sites, no signs of malnutrition, no warfare scars. A society not driven by conquest, but by construction and shared effort. Their legacy suggests cooperation over hierarchy. Perhaps leadership rotated like seasons, not fixed like throne. Perhaps wisdom, not wealth, shaped influence. We do not know. We infer as gently as archaeologists brush soil from stone slowly, respectfully, aware we hold something fragile. Why do we know the stones but not the people who made them? Why do monoliths endure while their makers dissolve into myth? It may be that they vanished before writing could anchor memory, or that flood washed their history clean, or that they simply never valued name as much as knowledge. The anonymity feels intentional, like authors who sign their work not with signature, but with permanence. Their footprints fade into soil long since reclaimed by grass. Their hearths crumble, their voices fall silent. Only the architecture remains, like the bones of a long, quiet body. We study structure, yet struggle to imagine the spirit that built it. The hands behind the impossible become ghost, blurred by time not through weakness but through reverence. They exist not in pages, but in stone breath. We stand now at the threshold of disappearance, identity dissolving like mist at dawn. Who they were slips from grasp even as their achievements stand tall. We are left with presence and absence intertwined. The stones tell what was done, but not by whom. Identity blurs into disappearance. Civilizations do not always end with fire and conquest. Sometimes they fade quietly, like ink washed from parchment, leaving behind structure without story, foundation without name. As we stand among the vestiges of these ancient builders, the careful hands, the stone sentences, the skybound architecture, one question rises like smoke from embers not quite cold. How does a people so capable, so precise, so globally echoed vanish so completely? Was their disappearance slow and natural, carried off by climate and hunger? Or was something else at work, an erasure, not born of time, but of intention? The younger Dryas may have shattered them first. Oceans rising, crops failing, coastlines drowning beneath meltwater, fierce enough to swallow memory whole. A civilization built on shore and river might have watched its cities sink beneath waves, its great libraries break under storm, its artisans scatter inland with only fragments of wisdom left to carry. Knowledge so carefully preserved in stone may have become burdened to survivors more concerned with warmth and food than legacy. A world-ending disaster does not always kill people. Sometimes it kills what people know. But catastrophe alone cannot answer everything. Even after global flood, even after migration into new lands, traces should remain documents, names, stories unbroken. Instead, we find gaps wide enough to swallow centuries. Techniques vanish abruptly, as if someone closed a book mid-sentence and hid the pages. Sound carries memory, but sound fades. Stone remembers, but only if someone remains to read it. If knowledge survived in guarded circles, priesthoods, craft guilds, lineage kept secret like flame, it could have died with a single generation broken by famine or war. Secrets protected too tightly can suffocate. And still, there is a third possibility, more unsettling than disaster or forgetfulness. History is often written by those who endure, not those who originate. Empires rise not only by building new, but by burying what came before. If later powers found remnants of an older world, temples no king commissioned, monuments no priest could claim, how would they respond? Reverence or appropriation? A ruler gains authority not by admitting someone older and wiser built first, but by claiming legacy as his own. Knowledge-threatening hierarchy does not survive without contest. It is easier to erase predecessors than to share power with ghosts. Imagine priests inheriting a star calendar they did not create. Imagine kings standing atop platforms they could not replicate. To admit origin is to admit limit. Erasure becomes strategy. Myths shift from memory into metaphor. Gods replace ancestors. Stories of teachers become stories of deities. History thins itself, drowning truth beneath narrative, not lost overwritten. The darkness here is subtle, not cruel. Suppression does not require conspiracy, it requires convenience. A forgotten world may have been smoothed into legend because legend is easier to control than memory. A civilization built on cooperation does not fit neatly into chronicles obsessed with conquest. Their voice may not have been silenced maliciously, only ignored until silence settled permanently. We cannot know whether time or intention took them. Perhaps both. Perhaps flood washed knowledge thin, and kings washed the rest. What we hold now are hints precision in stone, unmatched by later hands. Symbols carved like data, alignments whispering of celestial understanding. We know the architecture, we do not know its authors. Absence becomes its own evidence. What if they were silenced, not forgotten? What if a civilization once stood brilliant and whole, only to be reduced to ruin because their memory threatened the power of those who followed? The thought deepens the film's pulse, no longer pure wonder, but wonder edged with tension. Mystery grows heavier, and so we step forward into the next revelation, where absence turns to suspicion, and silence itself becomes clue, leading us toward a cover-up centuries never openly acknowledged. Evidence does not always disappear in flames or sink beneath flood. Sometimes it simply fades from view, unnoticed, unprioritized, quietly filed beneath more convenient narratives. Across the world, traces of ancient stone mastery appear like scattered constellations. Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Sacsayhuamán, Nabta Playa, Chavin, Yonaguni. Each stands alone in textbooks, isolated by geography and discipline, treated as anomaly rather than pattern. Yet patterns are there for anyone willing to look across borders, across eras, across assumptions. When placed beside one another, these sites resemble chapters torn from a larger volume. So why is the book never read whole? Mainstream history is not malicious, only narrow. It favors lines more than circles, beginnings more than cycles. When a discovery does not fit the accepted timeline, it is not always denied. Sometimes it is simply placed aside, redated quietly, classified as ceremonial, dismissed as coincidence or unexplained curiosity. A megalith aligned precisely to solstice may be labeled ritual rather than observation. A stone too heavy to move with known tools may be attributed to labor beyond imagination. But imagination is where truth often waits. Archaeological reports occasionally surface like ripples in still water. A site in the Amazon reveals buried geometric earthworks predating known settlement. Tools in North America date earlier than Clovis, then are forgotten in debate. Submerged stone roads off the coast of India receive brief headlines, then vanish beneath the tide of newer news. None of these are suppressed, merely overshadowed by inertia. Narratives are easier to maintain than rewrite. To integrate anomalies is to rethink origin, migration, connection. It is work, and work moves slowly. Some discoveries receive attention, briefly bright as spark, then dim as academic debate absorbs them. LiDAR scans reveal lost cities in Guatemala, their scale vast enough to rewrite Maya chronology, yet public understanding barely shifts. In Turkey, burial layers at Göbekli Tepe challenge assumptions, but remain framed as exception rather than sign of earlier complexity. In Peru, quarry marks on impossible stones suggest technology we no longer possess, but textbooks hold steady. Evidence drifts, unanchored by certainty. We do not accuse scholars of deception. Neglect can mimic suppression without intent. When one shard of pottery contradicts thousands of pages, the shard seems easier to ignore. Human minds like order, history like sequence. A civilization rising from simplicity comforts us. A civilization collapsing from brilliance unsettles. If the stones imply a forgotten apex rather than a gradual climb, then the ladder we stand upon feels less stable than we were taught. Discomfort invites silence. The narration moves like fog here, soft, unsettling, never shouting. We do not claim conspiracy. We suggest only that history, like memory, preserves what it finds useful and lets the rest slip. Scholars look for expected answers. Unexpected ones require courage, funding, time. Perhaps we have not lost evidence. Perhaps we simply haven't looked for it in the right places, or with the right questions. A myth interpreted as metaphor may be data misread. A carving dismissed as art may be record. A ruin framed as isolated may be connected across oceans by hands we no longer know. How can so many clues exist, yet remain unacknowledged? The viewer feels tension deepen, not through accusation, but through possibility. If evidence vanished quietly, is it because time erases, or because curiosity was never applied fully? Were these connections not drawn, or were they drawn then forgotten? We begin to sense a deeper stillness under the surface of accepted history, like fossils beneath packed sediment. Disinterest shapes memory. Inertia shapes archive. What is not taught is easily unremembered. A generation raised without knowledge of earlier brilliance will never ask what brilliance built the stones. And so the evidence remains visible, monumental yet unseen in meaning. If evidence disappeared in silence, we must ask who benefited from forgetting. And now that question leads us forward, as if a door opens where wall once stood. We step into the possibility that disappearance was not merely natural erosion, but the result of history being written by those who needed a beginning that excluded what came before. History is not a neutral record, it is a story told by survivors. Every empire that rose carved its own narrative, not out of malice, but out of pride. Victors write, rebuild, rename. They burn the libraries of those they conquer, not always to destroy knowledge, but to replace it. Alexandria's scrolls vanished in fire. In Mesoamerica, codices were thrown into flame under the hands of priests who believed they were saving souls. In China, dynasties erased the chronicles of those they overthrew, replacing truth with lineage gold washed over older paint. Rome repurposed temples, Persia absorbed Sumer, and Egypt built atop Horus the way others built atop sand. These acts are not anomalies, they are tradition. The past is rewritten when power shifts, and the version that survives becomes origin. If this is how history behaves in the last few thousand years, what then of the first few thousand? What if the civilizations we call the beginning were not beginnings at all? The Sumerians, brilliant and sudden, inventing writing without precursor or simply adopting symbols already understood by an older culture lost to time. Egypt, rising like sunrise on the Nile, with mathematics, astronomy, and monumental architecture already mature, not primitive, but inheritor. The Indus Valley system, complex at first appearance, urban planning, nearly perfect, no obvious evolution, only arrival. These cultures do not look like societies learning. They look like societies remembering. To question this is not to dismantle history, but to widen it. A reboot implies recovery, not invention. If knowledge was scattered after cataclysm, the first cities may have gathered fragments like children reassembling broken pottery, agriculture returning where it once thrived, stonework reappearing where it once dominated, rituals emerging like ghosts of earlier ceremonies. What we call origin might be echo. Conquerors rarely document those who came before them, unless those predecessors serve the new narrative. A forgotten civilization would not need to be erased through violence only ignored. If the survivors who rebuilt Mesopotamia, Egypt, or early dynastic China encountered remnants of an older world, carved stones, celestial markers, shattered monuments, they may have adopted what they understood and abandoned what they did not. Tools rust. Stories fade. But some knowledge would have stayed, woven into the first chapters of new civilizations like inherited instinct. The absence of reference is itself a clue. No text from early states mentions the evolution of their techniques. Writing appears complete. Agriculture appears organized. Architecture appears deliberate, as though the blueprint already existed, but the pages explaining how to read it were missing. What if those pages belonged to a civilization erased by water, then shadowed by new rulers who needed to be seen as origin, not continuation? This idea shifts the ground beneath accepted chronology. It does not accuse, it reframes. It invites us to imagine that history has layers, not lines, that civilizations do not emerge like sparks, but like embers rekindled after wind. A forgotten age might lie beneath our earliest chapters, buried like foundation stones beneath temples built later. The Romans built atop the Trilithon. Egypt carved its story over older symbols. Sumer inscribed clay upon land that may once have held older marks. What if the first civilizations were not the beginning, but the reboot? The question opens softly, like a curtain pulled aside in a darkened room. Not confrontation, but illumination. We are not tearing history down, only making space for what may stand behind it. A past not empty, but overwritten. Names replaced. Narratives corrected by those who needed power to look divine. Victors shape memory. Their history becomes the world's memory. What they ignore becomes myth. What they destroy becomes silence. And with that silence comes curiosity. Because if history began on page 3 instead of page 1, then something came before, and we have only glimpsed its shadow, which leads naturally to the next unraveling timelines that suddenly look wrong, where civilization appears too early, too perfect, too sudden, and where dates begin to bend under the weight of questions. When we trace history the way it is taught, we imagine a slow climb from simplicity to complexity, tiny steps, incremental invention, knowledge, accumulating like sand grain by grain. But the deeper we look, the less the timeline resembles a ladder. It looks instead like something fractured, interrupted, then restarted. A diary missing early pages, a melody beginning mid-note. Göbekli Tepe was built before agriculture. Megalithic construction appears suddenly, rather than evolving. Astronomy seems to flourish long before writing. Star maps etched into stone, align with skies no longer visible to the naked eye, constellations positioned as they were 10,000 or more years ago. How does a young civilization track deep astronomical cycles that take millennia to measure? How do walls in Peru appear more advanced than later empires who supposedly descended from the same land? History expects progress to be incremental. Yet what we see is acceleration without childhood. Architecture begins complex. Astronomy begins precise. Myth begins ancient. Instead of knowledge being discovered, it seems remembered as though someone inherited wisdom and reassembled it as best they could. Civilizations appear not like seedlings growing, but like old trees sprouting from buried roots. Archaeologists find sites that should not exist at their dates. Caral in Peru, monumental architecture older than the pyramids. Jericho, a city with walls older than most recorded history. The Indus Valley with sanitation and grid planning at its first emergence, not its last. Everywhere we look, sophistication comes early, then either plateaus or vanishes, not builds steadily upward. It feels like we walked into the middle of a story and assumed it was the beginning. Dating rests on fragments. Charcoal in layers, pottery in sediment, organic traces that survive by chance. 1,000 years can slip like sand through fingers when evidence erodes. And beneath ruin lie older ruins, still submerged coastlines now reachable only by sonar. Terraces beneath Black Sea waterlines, structures off Cuba's coast with patterns too geometric to be accident. They rest where no diver can reach easily, suggesting once there was land where deep ocean now reigns. The world was different. And if humans built there, their story predates our charts. When anomalies accumulate, they stop looking like exceptions. They become pattern. Sites older than agriculture imply agriculture was rediscovered. Star charts older than cities imply astronomy was inherited. Megalith work at its peak in its earliest appearances suggests knowledge survived collapse and was reused, not created anew. The more we see, the more the timeline strains. We are left with a feeling soft, unsettling, like reading a book and realizing whole chapters are missing. The pieces we do have do not form a beginning, they form echoes. Ruins do not whisper how knowledge was born, they whisper how it returned. Why does civilization appear suddenly, everywhere, as if memory was restored, not created? The thought arrives quietly, like dawn spreading light across forgotten fields. It is not conclusion but recognition, a realization earned through patience, like puzzle pieces clicking into place one by one. Viewers feel this moment, that subtle shift when what was odd becomes obvious. Not confrontation, but clarity. If the timeline is broken, if knowledge bloomed abruptly after long silence, then perhaps what we call the rise of civilization is only the rise of civilization after collapse. A reboot, not inception. Humanity may have known much, lost much, and recovered only fragments enough to build anew, not enough to remember fully. We stand at the edge of this new understanding. If timelines bend, then the people who built the earliest stones may not have been primitive dreamers, but heirs to a legacy older than recorded myth. Their memory may have held tools now lost, understanding now fragmented, purpose now obscured. And if the builders inherited more than we ever realized, it leads us into the next question. Perhaps they were far more advanced than history allows us to believe. Before ink and parchment, before numbers found symbols and triangles found proofs, someone carved mathematics into stone. Not as theory, but as architecture. Across the ancient world, geometry appears not emerging slowly, but fully formed, angles precise, ratios elegant, proportions so consistent they echo through modern engineering. The oldest ruins behave like equations made visible, as if their builders thought not in language, but in shapes. They solved problems by symmetry. They wrote history in alignment. They measured with intuition honed so deeply it no longer required measurement. Consider walls in Peru, where polygons interlock like facets on a crystal. No two stones are identical, yet all fit flawlessly. Their angles suggest internal logic, not trial and error, but design. Each face finds its partner, like variables balancing across stone. At Göbekli Tepe, circles sit nested within circles, pillars arranged according to invisible geometry still studied today. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid holds the golden ratio in its dimensions, phi embedded like heartbeat in limestone. Its base angles approach perfection, misaligned by only fractions of a degree, beyond what copper chisels should allow. These achievements do not look like experiments. They look like memories. Knowledge practiced long before written language emerged to record it. The golden ratio appears in structures predating Greece. Platonic solids appear in Neolithic carvings, long before Plato gave them names. How did forgotten people think in mathematics centuries before mathematics had a name? We imagine them not counting stones, but perceiving them. Geometry might not have been invention, it may have been observation. Nature is full of ratios. Shells spiral to phi, rivers branch in fractals, honeycombs tessellate like perfect hexagons. Ancient minds living close to wilderness may have sensed pattern the way we sense time. They carved harmony into architecture as bees build hexagon without ruler or blueprint. Intelligence does not require notation, only awareness. This section unfolds slowly, like geometry itself, each idea settling like dust on basalt, soft at first, then undeniable. Viewers feel wonder replacing skepticism. The more they study the angles, the less coincidence seems plausible. Megalith walls behave like graph theory. Temples align like coordinate systems. Even distance between sites sometimes reveal ratios, as though the world was mapped in thought long before the compass existed. Across continents, geometry repeats like memory resurfacing. At Stonehenge, trilithons mark arcs of sky, with precision still measurable by laser. In Mexico, Teotihuacan's layout mirrors celestial geometry, the avenue of the dead forming golden proportions against pyramid placement. In Malta, temples curve like nautilus shells, inner chambers spiraling like galaxies rendered in limestone. Geometry becomes language, one spoken by minds, fluent in form. This is not romanticism, it is observation. Wherever early builders worked in stone, mathematics breathes beneath the surface. Right angles appear when no metal tools were known. Perfect circles emerge where compasses did not exist. Ratios transcend regions. It is as if knowledge was once whole, then broken into fragments scattered across the world like seeds. Each culture nurtured one seed circle in Turkey, polygon in Peru, ratio in Egypt, hints of a calculus once complete. We walk through these sites with new eyes, no longer assuming chance. A wall becomes theorem. A pillar becomes proof. Carvings become algebraic narrative. And as geometry accumulates across continents like tide returning to shore, we begin to see not separate cultures, but unified thought expressing itself through local stone. Perhaps they did not calculate, they remembered. Perhaps mathematics was not learned, but inherited. A civilization before the flood might have mastered geometry, the way birds master flight, instinctive, not taught. When that world fell, survivors carried fragments of that knowing into new lands. Generation by generation, clarity faded but structure remained. Memory distilled into stone. Mathematics does not lie. Angles do not exaggerate. Ratios do not worship myth. The stones tell us someone once understood geometry deeply, elegantly, powerfully, and passed the knowledge forward without script. And where there is geometry, there must be measurement. A mind that calculates angle must track shadow. A hand that shapes symmetry must watch sky. If mathematics guided their stones, astronomy must have guided their thoughts. The next question unfurls like constellation across night. What were they measuring above? If geometry was their language on earth, then astronomy was their scripture in the sky. Across the ancient world, stones do not merely stand, they point. They lean toward sunrise on the longest day of the year, or frame the moon as it reaches its farthest northern rise, or cast shadows that track seasons with the precision of clocks made thousands of years later. The builders were not glancing upward out of curiosity. They were watching with purpose. Their monuments measure time not by hours or days, but by ages, solstices, lunar nodes, precession cycles spanning 26,000 years, far longer than any human life. Someone watched the sky for centuries. Someone remembered the slow drift of stars that change position only slightly in each lifetime. Knowledge this vast could only survive if passed like flame from mind to mind, generation to generation. This was patience refined into culture. In Peru, at Machu Picchu, the Intihuatana stone casts a shadow so precise it disappears entirely at equinox, marking balance between day and night. In Britain, Stonehenge frames midsummer sunrise through a single corridor of stone. In Malta, temple doorways align with winter solstice like gateways for light. In Japan, the megaliths at Asker whisper to equinox as well. Across oceans and continents, we find architecture that behaves like observatory, not one, but many. Cultures separated by time and geography share the same celestial intelligence. They did not just watch the sky, they understood it. The moon, too, leaves its imprint on stone. At Newgrange in Ireland, a shaft of light penetrates a chamber only once a year at winter solstice. Sunrise illuminating spirals carved into darkness like galaxies drawn in limestone. The great Zimbabwe ruins track lunar standstills. At Nabta Playa, stone circles aligned to Orion's belt, in a configuration accurate only to skies of 7,000 years ago. These are not accidents of placement. They are calculations turned into architecture, astronomy poured into structure. To build such monuments without writing required memory deeper than paper could ever hold. Knowledge stored in ritual, preserved in song, repeated across lifetimes until stone became archive. We are left to wonder, who watches the sky for centuries and why? Perhaps they were predicting seasonal migration, or the return of game, or the ebb of monsoon winds. But the scope feels larger. Solstice is moment. Precession is epoch. Tracking star drift requires more than survival. It requires vision. These people were not merely marking seasons. They were marking cosmic cycles, recording the slow turning of Earth like pulse beneath skin. They looked upward and saw not stars, but clockwork. The narration moves softly here, inviting awe rather than certainty. We hover above fields of monoliths like satellites, watching shadow sweep across stone, the way time sweeps across history. The builders were sky readers, not by accident, but by identity. They watched sun and moon the way others watch horizon for threat or opportunity. To them, the heavens were not mystery, they were navigation, prophecy, memory. Patterns emerge across continents like constellations themselves. The pyramids of Giza mirror Orion's belt. The layout of Teotihuacan reflects the path of Venus. Angkor Wat tracks the precession of the equinoxes. The very shape of Chichén Itzá creates a serpent of sunlight on equinox sunset. A celestial event carved into architecture like sentence into script. Everywhere the same knowledge reappears, as though the world shared one teacher before it broke into fragments. To learn this sky required patience beyond modern life. To measure precession, one must watch stars shift degree by degree across generations. No single person could record the cycle, only lineage could. A grandmother teaching her child to count stars. A priest instructing apprentice to carve shadow markers into stone. A lineage of minds spanning centuries, each adding one thread to tapestry of understanding. Civilization here is not conquest, but continuity. Not empire, but inheritance. The more we see, the more ancient intelligence becomes undeniable. If geometry structured the earth, astronomy structured time. Civilizations measured the heavens like heartbeat, slow and steady, until sky became companion rather than mystery. They built monuments not to gods, but to cycles, reminders that time turns, that ages rise and fall like stars across horizon. Night watchers, late thinkers, cosmic dreamers. This is where awe settles into recognition. We are not looking at ruins. We are looking at instruments, devices built of stone to measure eternity. And where there is measurement, there is movement. A culture that knows the sky so intimately could navigate not only seasons, but oceans. Stars could guide them across waters as easily as across land. If they read heavens like map, then the sea was not barrier, it was highway. From here, our path follows water, where sky and tide meet, where starlight becomes compass, where ancient voyagers may have crossed worlds long before history learned to write their names, long before cartographers drew coastlines on parchment, and long before compasses swung obediently toward north. The sea was a road wide, shimmering, old as creation itself. We imagine the ocean as barrier, yet waves carry weight like pathways between worlds. Ancient sailors may have understood this truth intuitively, not as theory, but as legacy. Stars told them when to depart. Currents guided them like veins through living water. Wind and moon were partners. Night was map. These voyagers were not lost wanderers. They were navigators. Picture the Pacific black water, stretching into infinity, moonlight rippling across its surface like polished obsidian. No land in sight, yet sails rise from the horizon, woven from reeds, bound by knowledge older than pyramids. These vessels, fragile to modern eyes, once crossed oceans with purpose. Polynesian DNA trails reveal migrations spanning thousands of miles, Samoa to Hawaii, Easter Island to New Zealand, not once in desperation, but repeatedly with intention. Ancient mariners reached islands scattered like stars across vast Pacific sky. They carried not only bodies, but story, technique, memory. Peru holds its own whisper of waterborne travel. Stones arranged in triangle formation along coasts face ocean as if watching for return. Reed boats on Lake Titicaca mimic those on the Nile. The design is nearly identical, though continents lie apart. Did two civilizations invent the same craft? Or did a navigator stand on one shore, then another, teaching where the currents flowed and winds favored travel? The sea connects places textbooks treat as separate. A boat is bridge. A star is compass. A voyager can carry knowledge the way flame carries light. Perhaps this is how fragments of civilization survived, collapsed not by walls but by water. Survivors of a drowned world may have followed flocks across sea routes, or tracked constellations remembered from generations of observation. They reached new lands not by accident, but by mastery. Migration becomes narrative. Imagine a small fleet leaving a homeland swallowed by rising tide. They carry seeds, stones, stories carved in mind. They follow sky like parchment. Days stretch into weeks, waves rise like mountains beneath hulls, but they continue not toward conquest, but continuation. They arrive on new shores, sharing survival like gift. This is not fantasy. This is possibility grounded in genetics, linguistics, craft. The sea becomes teacher. Storms test skill. Stars reward patience. Navigation itself becomes inheritance, passed from sailor to child like sacred right. A map exists not through ink, but through memory reefs known by moon shadow, islands by cloud height, horizons by scent. Knowledge remains alive because it moves. A static archive can drown. A lived one cannot. What if the first world maps were carved in memory, not on paper? Late-night minds drift into that image, easily sails ghosting across silver-black waters. No need for written chart because the sky itself is scripture. These sailors, perhaps descendants of the first builders, may have threaded continents into a web of contact. Egypt, Peru, Polynesia, Malta, not isolated, but cousins separated by tide. The sea, often feared, was their highway. They travelled by trust in rhythm, not by fear of distance. If such voyages existed, they could have carried fragments of geometry, astronomy, a stone lore across the world. A circle here, a calendar there, a technique half remembered, half reborn. Knowledge does not need empire to spread only water and those willing to follow horizon. And if they navigated oceans, they reached every land. This realization settles like tide at night, soft, inevitable. Suddenly, isolation feels less believable than connection. Stones aligning to stars across continents no longer seem coincidence. They seem correspondence. Memory passed by sail. Stories traded like pearls. A forgotten civilization may not lie buried beneath one ruin, but scattered across Earth like drifting light. From here, our vision expands. If oceans were roads, then the world was open, not closed. The next step is inevitable, exploring the possibility that one civilization left fingerprints everywhere. Sometimes patterns speak louder than evidence. When we look at the ancient world site by site, ruin by ruin, everything appears separate. One monument rising in a jungle, another beneath northern fog, another carved into desert stone. But when we set them side by side, not as isolated wonders, but as echoes of a single forgotten conversation, something remarkable happens. Shapes repeat. Ideas rhyme. Stone remembers a pattern the mind cannot ignore. In Ohio, the serpent mound stretches across rolling earth like a creature frozen mid-breath, its coiled body precise. Its alignment strangely astronomical. Half a world away, in Cambodia, Angkor Wat unfurls with the same serpent symbolism. Naga carved into stone as if memory travelled with builders across an ocean no history records. One continent holds the shape in earth, the other in carved sandstone, yet both point toward celestial meaning. Travel farther and pyramids rise like twins separated by water, not truth. In Mesoamerica, stepped temples climb toward sky with terraces like staircases of light. Chichén Itzá, Teotihuacan, Tikal. Across the sea in Indonesia, Borobudur rises the same way, a mountain of stone built layer by layer into spiraling geometry. Even older still, the terraced ruins of Gunung Padang hint at construction beneath construction, like time stacked instead of erased. These pyramids are not identical. Their stones differ. Their gods differ. But the idea is the same height as prayer, ascent as ritual, architecture mirroring sky. In Korea and Ireland, dolmens scatter like cousins long separated. Great capstones rest on uprights with balance, so deliberate it feels like sentence structure rather than building. Passage tombs in Newgrange glow with solstice sun the way Gochang dolmens align with lunar cycles. These traditions do not look like accidental convergence. They look like dialects, one language spoken with different accents. Yet, we avoid conclusion, resisting the urge to shape mystery into answer too soon. The narration remains gentle, letting curiosity swell like tide rising against stone. What if these similarities are coincidence, born of human imagination repeating itself around the globe? Bricks stack, stones stand, stars guide. Perhaps every culture saw the same sky and built toward it. Perhaps every continent dreamed of snakes, mountains, chambers of the dead. Or perhaps patterns are not invention, but inheritance. Echoes across the earth feel too synchronized to ignore. Serpent in Ohio, serpent in Angkor, stepped pyramid in Mexico, stepped pyramid in Java, dolmen in Europe, dolmen in Asia, cave spirals in Ireland, and spiral petroglyphs in New Mexico, twin shapes born continents apart. Even the mythic structure repeats. Gods descending from sky, floods washing away old worlds, knowledge gifted then lost. It is as if one story scattered like ashes across wind, taking root differently in each land, but recognizable still. Isolation suggests uniqueness. Connection suggests lineage. And the more these ruins speak to one another across oceans, the more the latter feels possible. Not certain only possible, but possibility is enough. Wonders do not need answers to inspire. They need only alignment, rhythm, repetition. When architecture matches thought across distances too large for coincidence, it invites a new way of seeing. The viewer begins to feel history pulse beneath the surface like continents once closer, stories once shared. We do not know whether ancient builders crossed oceans, or whether memory traveled through trade, migration, or catastrophe survivors. But we see echoes like constellation, separate stars forming a single figure when connected by line. Perhaps no culture copied another, perhaps each carried a fragment of something older, a template remembered faintly, a geometry inherited like instinct. These monuments feel like different verses of the same poem, written in stone instead of ink, recited across millennia. The camera pans slowly, from jungle pyramid to desert mound to rain-slick dolmen. Shapes rhyme across wide earth. The effect is quiet revelation. Not revelation as answer, but as awareness. Pattern becomes presence. Echo becomes voice. How did the same architectural ideas appear on opposite ends of the world without contact? The mind sits with this question like warm stone in hand, not demanding solution but savoring weight. A global symmetry begins to form, diffuse, but undeniable. We continue not as skeptics nor believers, but as listeners drawn deeper into resonance. If patterns connect globally, perhaps they share origin. We stand now at the edge of that possibility, the idea that one civilization, or one memory, once stretched farther than we imagine. The next step is to follow that possibility into something even more intricate. Shared symbols, shared genes, shared remnants of a story greater than any ruin alone. Symbols migrate like birds crossing oceans, adapting to new climates, yet carrying the same shape in their wings. The ancient world leaves more than monuments behind. It leaves icons. Spirals carved into stone in Ireland reappear in New Zealand, sweeping across petroglyphs like galaxies rendered in rock. Suns with radiating arms shine in Australia, Mexico, Egypt. The thunderbird spreads its wings across North America, while Garuda soars through Hindu tradition, two avatars separated by continents, yet feathered with mirrored myth. In the Norse Edda, the world tree binds heaven and earth. In Mesoamerica, the ceiba performs the same role, roots in the underworld, branches in celestial realm. A shared imagination suggests connection, where history insists isolation. We trace these symbols, not as abstract art, but as cultural genes, fragments of story, surviving like seeds after fire. Suppose a flood or catastrophe scattered a once unified people. Those who fled carried not architecture or archive, but memory, song, story. Stone can sink, but myth floats. Survivors may have walked or sailed into new lands, with stories curled inside language like DNA, unfolding generation by generation. In one place, the serpent becomes river. In another, it becomes lightning. In another, knowledge bearer or guardian at the edge of sky. Same structure, different voice. The spiral is perhaps the oldest of these cultural genes. It appears in Paleolithic caves and Polynesian tattoos, on Celtic stones and Hopi pottery. A symbol of infinity, of life's turning wheel, of seasons and stars. Did separate cultures arrive at the same icon by coincidence? Or did they inherit it, a memory of cycles so ancient it predates agriculture itself? Symbols behave like fossils. The deeper we dig, the more universal they become. Thunderbird, Garuda, Quetzalcoatl winged beings carrying power between worlds. Sun gods reborn across cultures. Ra of Egypt, Surya of India, Inti of the Andes. Flood myths that echo like thunder from Mesopotamia to Australia to the Pacific Northwest. If these stories evolved independently, the world is full of astonishing repetition. If they share root, then somewhere in deep prehistory stands a storyteller whose voice became world. We do not claim truth, only possibility. It is thrilling enough to hold the question. Imagine survivors of a lost age telling their children how the world once ended, how waters rose, how gods guided them, or how knowledge was nearly forgotten. Those children grow, cross sea or mountain, settle in distant places. They tell their children too, but details shift like accent. One culture remembers Sky Serpent as teacher, another as destroyer, another as bridge between realms. The story mutates, but core remains. Myth becomes memory, stretched across oceans and centuries, evolving like language yet recognizable in form. Perhaps civilization did not spread from one center outward like river delta. Perhaps it scattered like embers carried on wind. Each ember landing in new land ignites a different flame. Egypt, Sumer, Olmec, Shang, each bright yet bearing trace heat of the same source. Cultural genes are not proof, but resonance. They hum beneath difference like harmony beneath melody. We drift, patiently, through this web of symbols. Viewers recognize patterns not because we name them, but because they feel them. Thunderbird like Garuda, spiral like galaxy, Seba like Yggdrasil. Myths do not look separate now, but related cousins in an unbroken line. The stories of creation, destruction, rebirth feel like memories retold, not fantasies invented. Are myths scattered or descended from the same ancestral storyteller? The question sits softly, like ember in cupped hands, faintly glowing. It neither demands answer nor denies doubt. It invites reflection, a long look into the possibility that human imagination has ancestry, that somewhere beneath time lies a shared inheritance of meaning. But connections are not proof. Similarity is suggestion, not certainty. Patterns whisper, but they do not speak outright. And so we move forward with gentleness, allowing the unknown to remain unknown, knowing that mystery nurtures thought. As we step into the next inquiry, the tone shifts. Curiosity remains, but humility tempers it. Because while echoes feel like lineage, they could also be coincidence, convergence, born of similar sky, similar earth, similar hope. The next section asks us to hold both truths lightly. Resonance and uncertainty, inheritance and independence side by side. Like twins whose resemblance invites wonder, not conclusion. Not every echo proves a voice. Similarity can emerge from distance, like two rivers flowing from separate mountains yet carving curves that resemble each other. Spirals appear in shells and galaxies. Perhaps they appear in art, simply because nature suggests them. Pyramids rise where stone is plentiful, and mountains inspire imitation. Serpents slither through dreams because they slither through grass. It is possible that cultures shaped meaning from identical landscapes, identical fears, identical awe beneath the same stars. Convergence is not impossible, it is elegant. Independent invention happens in science, language, architecture. We must hold that truth gently. Skeptics remind us that humans everywhere share the same sky and similar needs. Architecture evolves where gravity rules, where shelter matters, where ritual needs space. A stepped pyramid may be the most stable way to build upward without collapse. A dolmen may be the simplest tomb elevated from flood. Spirals could represent seasons without implying shared ancestors. Symbols migrate through trade. Myths adapt along route. The world need not shrink to explain similarity. Minds may simply grow in parallel. We entertain these arguments without resistance. They calm the narrative like breath. If the serpent appears in temples separated by oceans, perhaps that is because the serpent is universal, feared, revered, powerful. If thunderbirds and sky serpents stretch across mythology, perhaps lightning itself carved the story, not forgotten sailors, or ancient wanderers. If sun gods rule across continents, perhaps humanity looked upward and saw warmth, harvest, survival, and worshipped accordingly. In this reading, legacy becomes coincidence wearing familiar face. But then the tension returns quietly, like tide receding only to gather strength. If coincidence explains everything, why does it feel like memory? The deeper we sit with uncertainty, the more alive it becomes. Coincidence is neat. Legacy is haunting. The truth may lie somewhere between them, an overlap of shared instinct and inherited story. Humans could imagine similar patterns independently, yet also carry fragments of older knowledge into new lands. Myth may be both invention and remembrance. Culture may be shaped by environment and lineage. Convergence and inheritance need not exclude one another. They can coexist like two notes forming one chord. We loosen our grip on certainty, letting possibility breathe. The hypnotic state emerges here, the space between explanation and wonder. If the world once held a civilization that fragmentated into many, its traces would look exactly like this. Resemblances without records, patterns without origin, cultural genes scattered like pollen. But if no such civilization existed, human minds might still dream in symmetry, still invent pyramids where mountains stand, still draw spirals where tides turn. The unknown is not threat, it is invitation. We allow viewers to drift through this balance like smoke through sunbeam. The film does not decide. It does not need to. Mystery is not failure of fact. It is oxygen of curiosity. The goal is not to prove, but to feel the possibility, to sense history breathing beneath surface. Some may lean toward legacy, one source, one memory carried outward. Others toward coincidence, parallel brilliance arising independently. Both views hold beauty. Both honor human imagination. Wonder grows when certainty recedes. Uncertainty becomes the most powerful resonance of all. The mind lingers where answer dissolves. The audience remains awake, floating between worlds, not forced to choose, only invited to question. Next, we search not for proof, but for the last message they left behind. We move toward the possibility that somewhere, hidden still, lies a final record, a stone, a pattern, a place where memory did not scatter but remained whole, waiting. We return to the stones not as tourists now, but as readers before an unopened book. The carvings that once seemed decorative begin to rearrange themselves in the mind, not as images, but as grammar. A fox beside a bird, a serpent beneath a circle, a sequence of animals that repeats from pillar to pillar. Perhaps these are not pictures at all, but lines. What if every symbol was a sentence waiting years to be read? At Göbekli Tepe, certain creatures appear together so often that coincidence feels thin. A vulture stands beside what looks like a sphere, as though holding the sun or moon in its claws. A scorpion lurks beneath abstract shapes that mirror a constellation. Other stones show cranes, boars, and big cats in deliberate order, arranged like characters on a page. It is easy to dismiss this as art, but in a sacred place, art is rarely random. It points beyond itself. Imagine that each animal carried two meanings, one in the visible world and one in the sky. A fox might represent cunning, but also a specific star group. A serpent might stand for danger, but also for the winding path of the Milky Way. A vulture could speak of death, and also of a time of year, when a pattern rose before dawn. Sequence then becomes story. When one creature follows another, it may be telling of a season, a cycle, or a catastrophe woven into the heavens. Repeating symbols could mark migrations, a sign carved along a route, guiding travelers who shared the same inherited key. A spiral beside a bird might mean, follow the river until it turns, while a hand and sun together might whisper, wait here for light's return. We cannot know which translation is true, but we can feel intention in the repetition. These images are carefully placed, not scattered. They cluster in ways language does. We walk through these interpretations slowly, step by step, the way one might trace fingertip across a script in an unknown tongue. Hypnotic, deliberate, never rushing to a single answer. Instead of claiming we have cracked the code, we invite the possibility that a code exists. The carvings begin to feel less like static art and more like frozen speech voices, caught mid-sentence at the moment a civilization went quiet. Some suggest that certain arrangements may record a great event in the sky, a comet, perhaps, or a sudden shower of fire. If that is true, then the stones are not only shrines but records, marking the night the sky changed and the world below suffered. A scorpion beneath a falling pattern, a vulture with outstretched wings over a circle. These combinations might be memory of danger, carved so it could not be forgotten. Even simple marks, repeated across many sites, gain weight. 3 lines beside a circle, a ladder shape next to an animal, crossed lines under a crescent. Each could be a number, a direction, a warning, a name. Imagine living in a world where no one writes in ink, yet everyone understands that a carved sign on stone carries meaning across distance and time. The pillar becomes letter, the temple becomes page. For puzzle-minded souls, this is where curiosity sharpens. The idea that we stand surrounded by unread sentences is both thrilling and humbling. We are latecomers, entering a library, trying to reconstruct the catalogue from remaining shelves. We may never translate these symbols, but the act of trying draws us closer to the minds that carved them. As the eye lingers on each relief, the viewer can almost hear murmurs beneath the silence. The stones are not dead, they are paused. They hold their meaning the way a closed book holds its story, patient, complete, waiting for someone to care enough to open it. If every symbol is a sentence, then together they form a message. Not to us, but to whoever came after the flood and the forgetting. Our next step is not to prove the script, but to wonder, if we could finally read it, what would it tell us about the world that carved it? If symbols are sentences and stones are pages, then the next question rises like tide against shore. What were they trying to say? Perhaps the message carved into limestone and basalt is not triumph or theology, but remembrance, soft, fragile, urgent. A memory preserved in symbols so durable that even after people forgot why they carved them, the carvings remained. A civilization leaving instructions for whoever came next, the way one leaves a note for a child asleep, knowing morning will come too soon. Some researchers see flood narratives shaped in reliefs, a vulture carrying a sphere like the sun swallowed by darkness, a scorpion crawling beneath it like danger rising from below. Patterns recur as if marking seasons or catastrophe. A procession of animals could map constellations at a time when the sky was different, recording the night a comet crossed the heavens, or the year temperatures fell sharply, or the ocean swallowed cities. If so, the stones might not predict disaster, they might remember it. They could be an archive of survival, not prophecy, a warning written backwards in time. We imagine the builders carving story with hands steady from memory. A father guiding a child's chisel across grain, saying not in words but through instruction, "This is when the water came. This is how we endured. This is what you must remember if it happens again." Their tone may have been reverent, not fearful like survivors whispering gratitude to stars that guided them to higher ground. A civilization that lost almost everything may have tried to ensure the next generation lost less. If the message preserved is memory, it might describe how to rebuild, which stars to follow when coastlines drown, which seeds endure long cold, which routes mountains offer when plains disappear. A circle might mean sun's return. A spiral might trace generational cycles, turning inward and outward like breath. A series of birds might point to migration paths, wings echoing wind patterns known by sailors who once crossed ocean routes no map records. Knowledge of this kind could shape rebirth after collapse. There is melancholy in this possibility, not despair, but the soft ache of someone who knows they may not be remembered except through what they leave behind. The stones may be love letter to the future, not lament for the past. They may be manual for continuity, written in the only language they trusted would survive time's slow erasure. Not prophecy but preparation. Not doom but kindle for restarting flame. We sit with these interpretations gently, as one holds an artifact too delicate to own. The narration does not claim certainty, it breathes possibility. Each symbol may hold meaning or may hold silence. We may misread, we may misunderstand, but intention feels present like pulse beneath skin. These carvings feel less like worship and more like guidance, a people speaking to time itself. If stones remember, then they do so for a reason. Perhaps they were carved after disaster, not before. Perhaps the builders knew the world could change again. They lived close to climate, to hunger, to rhythm of river. They felt seasons not abstractly but physically. To them, history was cyclical, not linear. Collapse was not end, only winter. Recovery was spring. If so, the stones become calendar for civilization, marking both bloom and frost. What if the stones were less monument and more manual? The question settles into the viewer softly. like snow falling on ancient foundation. No urgency, only wonder. The carvings feel like voices reaching across 10,000 years, asking not for worship but for attention. They do not shout predictions, they whisper instructions, and the possibility that we are only now learning to hear them gives the story shape. We picture a moment long ago, the last of an elder generation standing before fresh-cut limestone as younger hands wait to carve. They speak of floodwaters that erased cities, of fire falling from sky, of cold years when sun dimmed and crops failed. They do not seek followers, they seek continuity. They want someone to remember when all memory is drowned. They know stone speaks longer than blood, and if warnings imply return, then memory implies cycle. The builders may not have been telling us what happened, but what may happen again. Their symbols could be instruction for survival, not elegy for loss. We feel the weight of that idea like hand pressed to ancient wall. Not fearful, only awake. Warnings imply return. Civilizations are not straight lines, they are waves. They rise like dawn across valleys, swell into golden noon, and then recede into evening quiet. Empires bloom, flourish, decay. Knowledge gathers like deep river water, then scatters into streams when the river floods. The pattern feels almost biological, like breath expanding and contracting across millennia. What if the stone builders were not first, but second or third inheritors of a long, unrecorded cycle? What if they lived after a reset, rebuilding from fragments of memory, the way survivors of shipwreck gather timber to construct new vessel on unfamiliar shore? In this light, their monuments feel less like origin and more like recollection. The geometry that appears suddenly, fully formed, could be echo of an older mastery. The astronomical precision spanning ages might reflect knowledge learned before the flood, practiced again after. Their symbols may be not creation, but salvage the remains of a previous world carefully arranged, so the next world would not begin from nothing. If they carved warnings into stone, perhaps they did so because they remembered collapse, not because they feared it. The viewer feels closer to them now, not as distant mystery, but as relatives across time. They knew fragility. They watched climate shift, oceans swell, stars alter position. They understood how easily knowledge dissolves when disaster comes. They carried memory the way modern people carry electricity and steel, as foundation so familiar it becomes invisible. And when their cities fell, they carved reminders for whoever rose next us perhaps, or someone after us. The thought turns ancient hands human again. Not gods, not myths, family. We stand inside that realization with quiet reverence. Civilizations repeat as tides repeat. Not identical, but with rhythm. A crest rises when curiosity and cooperation align. It breaks when imbalance, hubris, or catastrophe intervene. The stone builders may have lived through a night that followed their world's noon. Their monuments could be the dawn of morning after, brilliant, strange, sudden. We often claim progress grows forward, but what if it also grows backward, drawing from buried roots? Recovery resembles invention from a distance. Memory resembles genius when origin is lost. We look at our own world in this mirror, and it changes shape. Cities lit by electric stars, satellites mapping sky, oceans crossed by steel instead of reed. Yet the same fragile dependence remains. We trust stability because we inherited comfort, but so did they. They too built beautiful things. They too believed permanence. And still the sea rose, still the world shifted, still memory scattered like seeds. What if we are living in the next cycle, unaware a last one existed? The question does not accuse, it whispers. If history moves in waves, then we stand not at the beginning of human story, but in the long middle, unsure how many cycles preceded us, or how many remain. This perspective does not darken the tale, it deepens it. It connects us to those ancient hands, patient, ingenious, hopeful, who tried to leave breadcrumbs through time. We feel gratitude for their effort, and a subtle responsibility grows. If they carved memory into stone, what do we carve into ours? The camera in the mind turns softly to present. We no longer search ruins, only for answers we search for reflection. If they rebuilt after collapse, we might do the same. If they survived a reset, so could we. The unknown becomes companionship rather than threat. The ancient world stops feeling distant and begins to feel intimate, like a voice behind us speaking quietly through ages. And now, With cycles acknowledged, we step forward. We begin searching for where this story resurfaces now in modern findings, in anomalies still emerging, in clues rising from ocean floors and melting ice. If stones hold memory of a collapse before, perhaps there are places where memory surfaces again, waiting for us to notice. If ruins are the bones of forgotten civilizations, then DNA may be their lingering breath. Human migration was once imagined as a tree, one origin point branching outward into continents. But the deeper we look, the less life behaves like a tree. It looks instead like a tapestry, threads weaving, breaking, reconnecting across oceans and eras. Some strands carry color unseen in later weaves, ancient pigment woven into modern cloth. Our genes tell stories our history never recorded. There are migrations that defy the map. Genetic markers appear in places they should not exist. Polynesian traces in South America, older than Inca expansion. Australo-Melanesian signals in Amazonian tribes long before European arrival. The Sami of northern Scandinavia share faint lineage echoes with distant populations no river or land bridge connects easily. Tiny clusters in remote mountain valleys carry haplogroups older than agriculture, older than known settlement, like embers from fires that burned in the first age of builders. We do not present these discoveries as proof-only breadcrumbs. Research still grows, evidence still breathes, but patterns suggest movement across oceans, long before history acknowledges sails. If ancient navigators carried memory by boat, perhaps they also carried blood. A lineage could cross water, the way story does. Quiet, persistent, surviving in bodies even after language changed. In the Andes, a few genetic signatures suggest contact with Pacific voyagers. On Easter Island, DNA once hinted at South American presence before European ships. In Australia, traces of South Asian ancestors appear where no land route existed. These migrations are not linear. They are braided, like rope strong enough to cross unknown sea. Each thread hints but does not confirm. Mystery persists, but it is warm mystery, alive like pulse beneath wrist. We imagine descendants of stone builders carrying fragments of ancestry the way we carry echoes of childhood dreams. Their blood may have moved through time quietly, diluted by centuries yet present, like faint watermark on parchment. Perhaps some of us walking modern streets carry the genetic memory of those who carved the first pillars, who read the sky as scripture, who survived the flood and rebuilt the world from ash and stone. What if some of us still carry the blood of the first architects? The question trembles with personal wonder. Mystery no longer lives only in ruins, it lives in people. Viewers feel themselves woven into the narrative, not spectators but inheritors. A late-night watcher might wonder whether their own lineage holds fragments of ancient knowledge, dormant like forgotten password waiting to be spoken. The story moves inward, from stones into skin. Genetic breadcrumbs remind us that humanity is not neat. It does not unfold as timeline, but as tide coming, receding, returning with new shape. Haplotypes skip continents. Mitochondrial imprints flow across hemispheres. No single group owns antiquity. All are branches of older roots we have barely begun to trace. Science finds anomalies, not explanations. Data stirs more questions than answers. But questions are fertile ground. We sit with uncertainty, not pressured to solve it. DNA is archive without translation key, yet patterns shimmer like symbols on stone. The oldest genetic lines may trace back to populations who weathered catastrophe, who carried knowledge across sea, who seeded cultures like stars spread across night. A forgotten civilization might not be lost, only dispersed, not erased, refracted. Humanity becomes tapestry, threads of different ages interwoven. Some bright and recent, some dim and ancient, some so old they border myth. And just as stone holds memory of geometry, genes may hold memory of survival instinct to gather, to observe sky, to build towards sun. Knowledge may survive not only in carvings but in us. Genes may persist, but so might knowledge. And so we follow the thread from blood to mind, from biological inheritance to intellectual residue. If ancient people traveled and rebuilt the world, what fragments of their understanding still echo through us? The next search leads not through bone, but through ideas, techniques, intuition, mathematics that reappear without origin. Knowledge might descend like myth or dream, resurfacing when the world needs it again. Not all knowledge is written in stone. Some lives in hands, in rhythm, in muscle memory, passed like flame from one generation to the next. The world often calls such knowledge primitive, but perhaps it is the opposite. preserved wisdom, distilled, resilient. If a forgotten civilization once existed, fragments of its mind may still move quietly through the people who never broke continuity. Skills that should have vanished after cataclysm instead endured in villages beneath stars, in islands surrounded by salt wind, in mountains where time walks slowly. Stone shaping still survives in rare pockets, techniques that echo megalith builders, though no blueprint remains. In the Andes, craftsmen tap rock along invisible fault lines until it splits like fruit ripe for opening. In India's temple quarries, granite is softened by fire and cooled by water in method older than record-keeping. In Polynesia, coral can be cut and shaped like limestone. These methods feel instinctive, inherited, as if memory sits deeper than language, no metal saws, no industrial tools. Yet the results resemble the precision of ancient ruins, not new invention, but remembered practice. Navigation without instruments persists in Micronesia, where wayfinders follow ocean swells like veins in living sea. They read wind pressure against skin, darkness of clouds, tilt of stars. They know birds fly toward land before dawn. Some can sense islands beyond horizon by patterns of reflected wave returning unseen. Western science marvels at this, yet calls it intuition. But intuition this precise is knowledge refined, tested, carried across generations like maps stored in blood. It should not exist if history unfolded as linear ascent. But it does. And it reminds us that intelligence does not need compass to see direction. In Australia, fire management practiced for tens of thousands of years shapes landscape gently rather than consuming it. Controlled burns mimic ecological cycles, clearing underbrush, encouraging new growth, protecting forest from inferno. Sustainable agriculture appears in terraces of Southeast Asia and in chinampas of ancient Mexico, floating gardens renewed season after season. Knowledge so elegant, modern science rediscovers it only after forgetting. This is not primitive, it is preserved. We approach these examples with humility, reverence. Our goal is not to romanticize loss, but to honor survival. These living traditions may hold pieces of a world older than empire, older than war. Techniques that defy assumption may be shards of ancient continuity. If a civilization fell before writing, its memory might persist not in script, but in practice. Farmers who still plant by moon, sailors who still read stars, builders who still feel stress within stone like heartbeat. Memory can live without record. What if lost knowledge never vanished, only changed hands? The question grows softly, like ember glowing beneath ash. Perhaps the last architects did not disappear entirely. Perhaps they became ancestors of those we now call indigenous people, who kept culture alive while cities rose and fell around them. They never needed to rediscover geometry. They felt it in river bend, in bird flight, in sun arc. They did not forget how to live with land, because they never learned to dominate it. Their brilliance is quiet, and so it was often ignored. This section asks the viewer to slow down, to see continuity where history draws break. A fisherman navigating by stars at night shares lineage with builders who traced Orion in stone. A farmer rotating crops by instinct shares logic with those who carved calendar into monolith. A sculptor who hears fracture within granite shares talent with ancient masons whose walls defy earthquakes. These skills are fossils of mind-living archive of human resilience. We step gently, without claiming direct descent. Not one culture holds answer, not one site holds source, but threads exist fragile, beautiful, stretched across millennia. The wisdom that survived catastrophe may be quieter than the knowledge that perished. But quiet does not mean weak. It means carried by care rather than conquest. The audience feels tenderness now, a shift from awe to respect. The lost world stops feeling mythical and starts feeling familiar, present, breathing through communities, still connected to earth and sky. We do not gaze backwards only, we look sideways at those who guard old rhythms, while modern world forgets. If skills endured, then memory endured. If memory endured, it can endure again. A future shaped not by nostalgia, but by continuity. Wisdom surviving implies future. Sometimes, progress looks like invention, and sometimes it looks like remembering. As modern science edges into fields once dismissed as speculative geopolymers, acoustic resonance, biological navigation, we glimpse something uncanny. The future begins to rhyme with the past. Ideas we call cutting-edge echo whispers from stone circles and buried cities. It feels less like discovery, more like return. Engineers today experiment with geopolymers, stone-like materials formed through chemical binding rather than brute carving. Some propose ancient builders may have practiced similar alchemy, softening limestone into a workable paste before casting it like mortar. No chisels required, only chemistry refined through practice. Whether true or not, the resonance stirs imagination. We are reinventing materials that may once have shaped pyramids. Acoustic levitation, lifting small objects through sound waves, seems like science fiction, yet laboratories achieve it now with tuned frequencies. Imagine hands guided not by muscle, but by vibration. A pillar humming at the right tone could lighten under resonance, shifting weight like breath. We do not claim this built the trilithon or the walls of Sacsayhuamán, only that physics is revealing possibilities once thought impossible. The very edges of technology blur, with myths of stones moved like feathers. We rediscover principles the ancients may have used instinctively. Even life itself carries tools we barely understand. Birds navigate continents using magnetic fields, guided by internal compasses more precise than any early instrument. Whales migrate across oceans with accuracy rivaling satellites. Bees calculate distance using sun angle and dance. These are living technologies, navigation older than sail, older than story. If creatures know such things, perhaps early humans did too. Not primitive, at all attuned. We stand at a moment where modern science reveals the world is stranger than we assumed. Quantum entanglement bends reality. Time behaves like tide. Memory shapes biology. The universe we thought mechanical appears instead, like script, elegant, interconnected. In this light, ancient architecture stops looking like anomaly and starts looking like harmony. We are not surpassing our ancestors, we are circling back to understanding that intelligence is not only invented forward, but remembered back. Are we rediscovering what they once knew by heart? The question unfurls softly, a bridge rather than verdict. We do not say technology fell from a golden age or that knowledge hid in stone. We say simply this: the more we advance, the more familiar the frontier feels. As if progress is returning to a place humanity once stood, long ago, before memory fractured and waves washed clean. Precision returns like tide. Science rediscovers what instinct once held. Agriculture moves towards sustainability practiced by ancestors. Architecture seeks seismic resistance mirrored in ancient walls. Navigation returns to stars through space exploration, just as sky readers traced constellations across night. The circle closes, not backwards, but inward towards center we never truly left. History feels less linear now, more like pulse. Rise, fall, remember, rebuild. Each cycle not repeat, but refinement. The lost civilization, if it existed, does not tower over us as unreachable myth. It walks beside us as echo. What they carved in stone, we rebuild in equations. What they carried through oral memory, we rediscover with instruments and theory. The bridge between then and now is not broken, only submerged, visible when tide retreats. This thought comforts. It paints history not as tragedy of collapse, but as arc of renewal. Knowledge is never entirely lost. It waits. It hides in genes, in symbols, in rhythm of waves, in tilt of stars, in hands that still shape stone by touch. Precision is not invention, it is return. And so we enter the final chapter, reflection, calm, legacy. The ancient world does not vanish into darkness. It rises like morning, remembering dawn. If the past is a landscape, then we have explored only its shoreline. Beyond the visible coast lies continent submerged, moss-covered, waiting beneath soil our shovels have not reached. For centuries we searched only what rose above daylight. Now technology lets us peel back darkness like old paint. New tools see what eyes cannot, hear what earth tries to hide. LiDAR sweeps through dense rainforest like wind through leaves, stripping canopy to reveal stone geometry underneath. Cities appear, where we believed only trees existed. Road networks grid, the Amazon, platforms ring, Guatemala. Temples sleep under moss like giants dreaming. Every scan reveals more. Each discovery suggests we are still at the beginning of what history holds. Sonar draws continents where waves erase memory. Beneath Caribbean blue, geometric foundations sit like chessboard of a forgotten world. Off the coast of India, a drowned city spreads across silt harbour walls, pillars, avenues, carved before written script. Japan's Yonaguni terraces descend through water like staircase into time. Cuba holds rumor of megalithic patterns 3,000 feet below sea, unreachable but persistent in echo. Humans once lived where tides now crash. We do not ask whether, only when, how many, how vast. Imaging satellites reveal desert lines invisible from ground geoglyphs, stretching like long-forgotten script, irrigation traces marking plains once green. Under the Sahara, radar shows riverbeds flowing beneath sand like veins. Climate once different. Land once fertile. Where water flowed, cities may have stood. Names unknown, stories swallowed. Soon we may read them like braille beneath dust. With each advancement, history shifts. What we believed fixed begins to tremble. We have uncovered only fragments, yet those fragments multiply. Every year, stone whispers grow louder. We begin to suspect our timeline is not wall but curtain, thin, translucent, waiting for light behind it to show relief of a deeper world. What history could become depends not on what was, but on what remains undiscovered. The future archaeologist will not hold trowel beneath sun. They will pilot drones through valleys, send scanners beneath clay, dive with robots into drowned canyons. Data will replace guesswork. Mountains will be mapped in hours. Forests become transparent. Oceans lose secrecy. The archive of Earth will open like book long shut. We stand near threshold of chapter unread for 12,000 years. The thought is not intimidating, it is luminous. Discovery expands like dawn across horizon, slowly at first, then unstoppable. What if one day we find a city older than every known empire, its layout symmetrical, its stones marked with script we nearly recognize? What if sonar reveals a ring of pyramids along a now drowned coastline? What if LiDAR exposes road systems crossing continents before nations existed? Not impossible, only unsearched. What will we uncover when we finally stop asking if and begin asking where? History becomes possibility instead of conclusion. The past stops shrinking into certainty and begins unfolding into landscape. We no longer stand at the edge of story, believing the page behind us is blank. We turn that page gently, and light pours through. The narrative grows not darker but wider. Each discovery seeds questions rather than answers. Curiosity replaces comfort. We reflect here, not as seekers of lost worlds, but as listeners. To truly hear history, we must let it grow beyond our assumptions. We must allow ruins to be more than isolated marvels, myths to be more than metaphor, migrations to be more than footnote. The future of archaeology is not confirmation, it is expansion. Every scan, every dig, every brush of sand from shard adds dimension to human story. This section breathes with wonder instead of urgency. We picture satellites mapping ancient shorelines, robots gliding through drowned avenues, holographic reconstructions of cities long buried. We imagine classrooms teaching timelines with branching possibility, not rigid certainty. History as evolving organism, alive, discoverable. We see documentaries like this one, not as endings but invitations, the first spark in a field, soon to blaze with revelation. We leave the viewer with horizon rather than wall. The past does not lie behind us, it lies beneath, around, still ahead, waiting to be uncovered. If we keep looking, history will not remain what we inherited. It will become what we discover. And now, with the world opening like gate and old silence lifting, we shift from exploration to reflection, not just what we find, but what we learn from finding it. The next section asks what inheritance means, not to ancestors, but to us who stand here now awake, listening, ready. The world often believes it is climbing toward a peak of knowledge, as though everything before us were only steps to where we stand. We measure progress in satellites and screens, forgetting that intelligence does not begin with us. It moves like tide, advancing, receding, returning. The stones remind us. They stand as patient witnesses to a truth. Modern minds resist. Humanity is far older, far deeper, far more cyclical than we allow ourselves to remember. The builders show us that genius is not a modern invention. It is an inheritance. These ancient architects, astronomers, navigators, whoever, they were carved memory into earth because they knew memory fades. Their pillars are not only walls but mirrors, reflecting a version of ourselves long buried beneath noise and speed. They teach without words. They ask us to slow, to notice star, shadow, season. To understand that progress is not merely accumulation of technology, it is continuity of wisdom. A civilization is measured not only by what it builds, but by what it remembers. We look at these stones and feel something hum beneath ribs: recognition, perhaps, or longing. The builders knew patience, a virtue nearly forgotten. They shaped rock grain by grain, tracked stars generation by generation, planned architecture on timescales modern cities cannot imagine. Progress now is fast, fragile, flickering. Their progress was deliberate, rhythmic, woven into centuries. They built not for lifetime, but for ages. We build for quarterly report and news cycle. The comparison softens us, not with shame, but with perspective. The stones matter now, because they prove silence is not emptiness. A lost civilization may not leave script, but it leaves shadow geometry in mountain, alignment in sunrise, story beneath myth. Absence itself becomes evidence. We do not see them clearly, but we feel them. Their legacy is not only pillars on hilltops, it is the question those pillars ignite. What came before us? What endures after collapse? How much have we forgotten without even knowing loss occurred? And then the thought deepens. Perhaps the greatest monument they built was not physical at all. Maybe their true creation is time endurance across epochs, memory carried through extinction, knowledge surviving catastrophe long enough to seed new minds. The stones are anchors. The message is permanence. They endured 12,000 years of rain, war, erosion, and still, they stand not in certainty, but in possibility. They remind us that survival is not just biological, it is intellectual, emotional, cultural. Humanity's brilliance lies not only in invention, but in resilience. What if the greatest monument they built was time itself? The question glows like candle in darkness. It suggests the builders spoke not to their own era, but to ours, or to one yet to come. They may have known collapse was inevitable, cycles unavoidable. They may have trusted future generations to rediscover what was lost, the way we are beginning to now. Their work reaches us across centuries like hand extended through water. We feel touch, but cannot see face. The stones matter now because we stand, once again, at edge of unknown. Our world has its own fragilities, climate shifting, oceans rising, systems stretched thin. We do not know where this cycle leads. But the builders offer perspective. Collapse is not final. Renewal follows. Knowledge returns like tide, carrying seeds of old world into new. The stones do not warn of doom. They prepare us for continuity. They whisper, endure, adapt, remember. Their legacy is patience. Their message is resilience. Their presence is invitation not to solve, but to wonder. And wonder is foundation of wisdom. We end this section softly, like dust settling in sunlight across ancient quarry floor. The viewer senses stillness, but not ending. Mystery remains, but no longer frightening. It feels like company, like inheritance. The stones are no longer cold artifacts. They are voices, distant yet steady, telling us we are part of story too large to measure in lifetimes. We look once more at monuments silhouetted against twilight. We breathe. We listen. We accept we know only fragment, and that fragment is enough. And now, the final section becomes a farewell. Quiet, slow, like evening closing around a world no longer forgotten. Night returns to the stones as it always has, slow, inevitable, tender. We circle back to where we began. Monoliths half buried in soil. Starlight resting on weathered faces. Wind moving through silence like memory breathing. No answers are carved here, only presence. Like tide withdrawing, the story does not end, it recedes gently, leaving patterns in sand for whoever comes next to read. We stand once more at the edge of time, listening. The narrator speaks softly, as though afraid to disturb something ancient. Some histories survive in ink and archive, guarded by kings and catalogues. Others survive only in absence, in stones that refuse to fall, in stars they once aligned to, in myths we cannot quite forget. The builders may be gone, but their echo remains not loud, but persistent, like heartbeat beneath earth. Their silence is not emptiness. It is language we have forgotten how to hear. We imagine them still, those patient architects, not as ghosts, but as ancestors whose voices softened into stone when words were not enough. Perhaps they never vanished at all. Perhaps their message hums through geometry, whispers in migration, glimmers in DNA we carry unknowingly. We walk through modern world with ancient shadow at our heels, Not threatening, only present, watching us the way sky once watched them. Perhaps the builders never vanished, perhaps we simply forgot how to hear them. The thought settles like dew on grass, cool and fragile, but alive. The viewer feels it, rather than understands it. The stones are no longer puzzle pieces, they are dialogue. A conversation began before writing, continuing now through curiosity and wonder. We realize the past is not behind us. It is underneath us, beside us, threaded into who we are. The tide of narrative draws back further, leaving wet sand glinting under starlight. We are not asked to believe or dismiss, but to remain open. Mystery, when respected, does not frustrate, it nourishes. The unanswered keeps the mind awake, the heart leaning forward. The builders become neither myth nor fact, but possibility, the most powerful shape a story can take. In the end, we stand before ancient stone as one stands before the sea, humbled, quiet, aware there is more beneath the surface than we will ever touch. We leave not with conclusion, but with companionship. The ruins no longer feel abandoned, they feel occupied by memory. The viewer carries that presence away, like candle cupped against wind. The camera withdraws across fields, across continents. Jungle returns, ocean swells, desert breathes. Sights disappear into night but not forgotten. We know where they lie now, hidden but awake. We know how to listen. The world grows wider behind us, not smaller. Fade to black. Mystery does not end here, it continues beyond the screen, across time, through our questions, through the soft pulse of wonder that lingers after the final word. The builders are not gone. They wait wherever stone meets sky, whispering through geometry, through shadow, through the silent patience of earth. And as the film closes, one truth remains, not certainty, but echo.